You think you're untouchable? You're nothing but dirt on my street!" Officer Corbin Rockford screamed, his face turning a violent shade of red. The sound of his hand connecting with her face echoed like a gunshot across the pavement. Crack! Elodie Kingswell didn't stumble. She didn't cry. She slowly tasted the blood on her lip, her eyes turning into cold, dark tunnels of fury. Rockford smirked, reaching for his handcuffs, thinking he had just dominated another helpless victim. He had no idea he had just signed his own death warrant. He wasn't arresting a criminal. He had just assaulted the woman who signed his paychecks. "You better pray that badge is glued on tight, officer," Elodie whispered, her voice slicing through the air. "Because I'm the new chief of police." The heat in Oak Creek was oppressive, a humid blanket that made the air shimmer above the asphalt. It was the kind of heat that made tempers short and patience thin. Elodie Kingswell adjusted the collar of her worn denim jacket, wiping a bead of sweat from her forehead. She looked nothing like the high-ranking federal agent she had been just 48 hours ago. Dressed in jeans, scuffed boots, and a plain gray t-shirt, she looked like anyone else. Perhaps even someone down on their luck. That was the point. The Oak Creek Police Department had a reputation. It was a fortress of good old boys, a tangled web of nepotism and corruption that had festered for 2 decades under the watchful, malicious eyes of the Kingscourt family. The city council was run by Tessa and Serena Kingscourt, twin sisters whose beauty was only outmatched by their cruelty. They had handpicked the previous chief, and they expected to handpick the next one. But the state governor had intervened. Citing a massive rise in unsolved civil rights violations and missing evidence, the state had appointed an outsider, Elodie Kingswell. She wasn't supposed to start until Monday. Today was Friday. She wanted to see the beast before she stepped into its cage. Elodie walked down Main Street, her eyes scanning everything. She saw a patrol car parked illegally in a handicap spot outside a donut shop. She saw 2 officers jaywalking to harass a street vendor selling flowers. She cataloged every infraction, her mind a steel trap. Her car, a beat-up rental she had specifically chosen for this exercise, was parked on the side of the road with the hood up. It was a test, a simple distress signal. She wanted to see who would stop. She had been waiting for 20 minutes. 3 patrol cars had passed. None had slowed down. One officer had even honked at her to get that junk off the road. Elodie sighed and leaned against the fender. "So, it's worse than the report said," she muttered to herself. Her phone buzzed. It was Milson Kingswell, her husband and one of the state's most vicious civil rights attorneys. "El, you okay out there?" Milson's deep voice was a comfort. "You know you don't have to do this undercover boss routine. You could just walk in there with your badge and fire everyone." "If I walk in as chief, they'll hide the roaches," Elodie said, watching a sleek black cruiser turn the corner. "I need to see where the rot is. I need to see how they treat the invisible people." "Just be careful," Milson warned. "The Kingscourt sisters have their claws deep in that precinct. And that Lieutenant Corbin Rockford, his file reads like a manifesto of police brutality that never went to trial." "Rockford?" Elodie repeated the name. "I'm looking for him." "Don't find him too hard," Milson joked, though there was tension in his voice. "Love you." "Love you too." Elodie hung up just as the black cruiser pulled up behind her rental. The lights didn't flash, but the siren gave a short, aggressive whoop-whoop. Elodie straightened up. She watched as the door opened. The man who stepped out was a mountain of muscle and ego. His uniform was tailored too tight, straining against his biceps. He wore mirrored aviators despite the overcast sky. He chewed gum with an open mouth, an arrogant rhythm. It was him, Lieutenant Corbin Rockford, and he wasn't alone. Stepping out of the passenger side was a younger officer looking nervous. He was pale, with messy blonde hair and a uniform that looked a size too big. Elodie recognized the name on his tag immediately, Soren Kingswell, her estranged nephew, the boy who had run away from the family to try and prove he could make it on his own. only to fall into the worst precinct in the state. Rockford didn't approach with a "need help, ma'am." He approached with his hand resting on his gun belt, his chest puffed out. "License and registration," Rockford barked, not even looking at her face, just staring at the car. "My car broke down, officer," Elodie said, keeping her voice calm, adopting a slightly submissive posture to see how far he would push. "I was just waiting for a tow." "I didn't ask for your life story. I asked for your ID," Rockford snapped. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. "You're blocking traffic. That's a citation." "There's plenty of room to pass," Elodie noted, glancing at the empty lane. Rockford took off his sunglasses. His eyes were cold, dead things. "Are you back-talking me? You look like you don't belong in this neighborhood. We've had reports of vagrants breaking into cars. This your car, or did you hotwire it?" Elodie felt the anger ignite in her gut, but she clamped it down. "It's a rental. The papers are in the glove box. If you let me—" "Hands where I can see them!" Rockford shouted suddenly, escalating the situation from 0 to 100 in a heartbeat. Soren, the rookie, stepped forward tentatively. "Lieutenant, she's just a motorist. The car looks overheated." "Shut up, Kingswell," Rockford spat without looking back. "I know a perp when I see one. She's got attitude, probably got drugs in there, that's why she's nervous." Elodie wasn't nervous. She was calculating the lawsuit. "I am not nervous, officer, and you have no probable cause to search my vehicle." Rockford froze. The air around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. He smiled, a cruel, predatory twisting of lips. "Probable cause? I'm the lieutenant of this town. I am the probable cause." He lunged for her. The speed of the escalation was textbook misconduct. Rockford didn't ask her to turn around. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it violently behind her back. "Hey!" Elodie shouted, wincing as her shoulder joint strained. "I have rights! You are hurting me!" "Stop resisting!" Rockford screamed, playing to the invisible audience, though the street was empty. He shoved her face first toward the hot hood of the rental car. "I'm not resisting!" Elodie yelled, planting her feet. She was trained in combat, highly trained. It took every ounce of her willpower not to sweep Rockford's leg and drop him onto the asphalt, but she needed him to commit fully. She needed the assault on record. She needed the body cam. She looked at Soren. The young officer was frozen, his hand hovering over his radio. "Lieutenant, stop! She's not fighting back!" Soren pleaded, his voice cracking. "I said shut up, rookie, or I'll write you up for insubordination," Rockford growled. He kicked Elodie's legs apart. "Spread 'em! I'm searching you for weapons." "You are violating the Fourth Amendment," Elodie stated clearly, her voice steely. "If you touch me inappropriately, I will bury you." Rockford paused. Her vocabulary was too precise. Her tone wasn't fearful. It was authoritative. That annoyed him more than anything. He spun her around, slamming her back against the car door. He got right in her face, his breath smelling of stale coffee and chewing tobacco. "You think you're smart? You think because you watched a couple of episodes of Law and Order you know the law?" Rockford sneered. "I run this town, me. Not the judges, not the mayor. Me and the badge." "You're a bully with a gun," Elodie said, looking him dead in the eye. "And you're about to lose everything." Rockford's face went purple. His ego couldn't handle the defiance. Without a second thought, pure rage took over the driver's seat of his brain. He pulled his hand back and swung. Crack! The slap was open-handed but heavy. It caught Elodie on the cheekbone and lip. The force of it snapped her head to the side. Her lips split instantly, the metallic tang of blood filling her mouth. Time seemed to stop. Soren gasped, horrified. "Lieutenant, you can't do that!" Rockford was breathing heavy, the adrenaline of violence coursing through him. "She assaulted an officer. You saw it, Kingswell. She lunged at me." Elodie slowly turned her head back to face him. A small trickle of blood ran down her chin. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a predator who had finally trapped its prey. She spat a glob of blood onto the pavement, narrowly missing Rockford's polished boot. "Assault on a police officer," Elodie said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming terrifyingly calm, "is a felony, but assault by a police officer, specifically a lieutenant, on a superior officer, that's career suicide." Rockford blinked, confused. "Superior officer? You're a bum with a broken car." Elodie reached into her back pocket. "Gun!" Rockford screamed, reaching for his holster. "It's a badge, you moron!" Elodie barked, the command in her voice so absolute that Rockford actually froze. She pulled out the leather wallet and flipped it open. The gold shield gleamed in the sunlight. It wasn't a patrolman's badge, it was the heavy, ornate shield of the chief of police. "I am Elodie Kingswell," she enunciated every syllable. "I am the new chief of police for Oak Creek, and you, Lieutenant Rockford, are under arrest." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Rockford stared at the badge. He looked at her face. He looked at the blood on her lip. Blood he put there. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse standing upright. Soren's jaw dropped. "Aunt Elodie?" he whispered. Rockford stumbled back a step. "Chief? No. No, that's not possible. The new chief is... She's coming Monday." "I decided to come early," Elodie said, wiping her lip, "to see what kind of officers I'm commanding. And I see I'm commanding thugs." She stepped off the car, advancing on him. Rockford, the mountain of muscle, actually shrank back. "Turn around," Elodie commanded. Rockford stood there, his brain misfiring. "Now look. Chief, let's not be hasty. You came at me aggressive. I was just following protocol. We can work this out. The King's Court sisters, they..." "Turn! Around!" Elodie roared. Rockford didn't move fast enough. Elodie grabbed his arm, spun him, and in a blur of motion, kicked the back of his knee. He buckled, hitting the ground hard. She snatched the handcuffs from his own belt and ratcheted them onto his wrists. "Officer Kingswell," Elodie said to her nephew, who was still staring in shock. "Read him his rights, and call a transport. I'm driving his cruiser back to the station." Yes, ma'am, yes, Chief," Soren stammered, scrambling for his radio. Rockford, face pressed against the hot asphalt, finally found his voice. It wasn't apologetic. It was venomous. "You can't do this. You have no idea who you're messing with. Tessa Kingscourt will have your badge before the ink dries on your contract." Elodie leaned down, whispering into his ear. "Tessa Kingscourt isn't here. And she didn't just slap a chief of police on body cam. You're done, Rockford." But as Elodie stood up, she saw Rockford's eyes. They weren't fearful anymore. They were calculating. He was already planning his way out, and in a town this corrupt, an arrest wasn't a conviction. The war had just begun. The drive back to the precinct was silent. Elodie drove Rockford's cruiser, with Soren following in the rental car he had managed to jump-start. Rockford was in the back of the transport van that had arrived, screaming obscenities that Elodie tuned out. When Elodie walked into the Oak Creek precinct, the atmosphere shifted instantly. She still had blood dried on her chin. She walked with a limp from where Rockford had kicked her legs, but her head was high. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set man named Miller who was busy playing solitaire, didn't look up. "Help you?" "I'm Chief Kingswell," Elodie announced to the room, "and I want everyone in the briefing room, now." Miller looked up, laughed, and then saw the badge hanging around her neck. He saw the blood. He saw the fire in her eyes. The laugh died in his throat. 10 minutes later, the room was full of confused, murmuring officers. Elodie stood at the podium. She didn't clean the blood off. She wanted them to see it. 20 minutes ago, Elodie began, her voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone, Lieutenant Rockford assaulted a motorist for a traffic infraction. He used excessive force. He profiled, and then he struck the motorist in the face. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the room. Rockford was their golden boy, the enforcer. That motorist was me. Elodie dropped the bomb. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Rockford is currently in a holding cell, Elodie continued. He is suspended pending an internal investigation, and let me make this clear. The culture of this department changes today. If you are a bully, if you are corrupt, if you think the badge is a shield for your ego, leave now, because I will find you. Suddenly, the doors to the briefing room burst open. Two women strode in, flanked by high-priced lawyers. They were identical twins, dressed in matching Chanel suits, one in white, one in cream, Tessa and Serena Kingscourt. They radiated old money and entitlement. "What is the meaning of this circus?" Tessa demanded, her voice shrill but commanding. She marched right up to the podium. "Who do you think you are, arresting my lieutenant?" Elodie didn't flinch. "I'm the chief of police, Ms. Kingscourt, and this is a police briefing. Civilians are not allowed." Serena laughed, a cold, tinkling sound. "We own this building, darling. We practically own this city, and we know who you are. You're the diversity hire the governor forced on us." Tessa leaned in, placing her manicured hands on the podium. "Rockford called us. He says you provoked him. He says you attacked him and he acted in self-defense. He says you're unstable." "The body cam footage will prove otherwise," Elodie said calmly. "What body cam footage?" Tessa smiled. It was a reptilian smile. Elodie felt a pit form in her stomach. She looked at Soren, who was standing by the door. Soren looked down at his shoes. "Sergeant Miller," Tessa barked. "Check the server. Was there any footage uploaded from Lieutenant Rockford's camera today?" Miller typed on a laptop in the corner. He hesitated, glanced at Elodie, then at the Kingscourt sisters. The fear in his eyes was palpable. No, ma'am. System says the camera malfunctioned. File corrupted." Elodie's hands clenched into fists. They had erased it. In the 10 minutes it took to get from the scene to the briefing room, they had wiped the evidence. "You see," Serena said, smoothing her skirt. "No evidence. Just the word of a hysterical woman against a decorated lieutenant." Tessa leaned closer to Elodie, whispering so only she could hear. "You made a mistake coming here, Chief. You think you're the hunter? You're the prey. We're going to ruin you. We're going to paint you as an angry, violent, affirmative action mistake who attacked a hero cop." Tessa straightened up and addressed the room. "Officers, return to your duties. Lieutenant Rockford will be released immediately pending a proper investigation conducted by the City Council." The officers looked at Elodie, then at the Kingscourts. Slowly, one by one, they stood up and filed out. They chose the power they knew over the new boss. Only Soren remained. "Get out, rookie!" Rockford's voice boomed. He was standing in the doorway, handcuffed removed, rubbing his wrists. He smirked at Elodie. "Told you! Untouchable!" Elodie stood alone at the podium as the room emptied. The Kingscourt sisters walked out with Rockford, laughing. Elodie pulled out her phone. She dialed Mileson. "They erased the footage," she said, her voice trembling with rage, not fear. "They released him." "I told you they were fast," Mileson said. "What's the move?" Elodie wiped the dried blood from her lip, looking at the stain on her thumb. "They think they won because they deleted a file, but they forgot one thing." "What's that?" "I'm not just a cop. I'm a Kingswell," Elodie said, "and I brought my own insurance." She looked at the corner of the briefing room ceiling. A small red light blinked on the security camera. But more importantly, she touched the button on her own keychain, a hidden camera. "Rockford is going to wish he stayed in that cell," Elodie said. "Mileson, get the team ready. We're going to war." The Kingscourt sisters had fired the first shot, but Elodie was about to bring the whole battlefield down on top of them. The following Monday was supposed to be Elodie's official first day. Instead, it was a gauntlet. When Elodie arrived at the precinct, her parking spot, marked Chief of Police, was occupied. A dumpster had been rolled into the center of it. Trash spilled over the sides, rotting in the morning sun. a clear message. Inside, the atmosphere was toxic. Conversations stopped the moment she entered rooms. Files she requested were misplaced. Her computer access was glitchy. It was a classic freeze-out, orchestrated to make her quit before she even started. But the real damage was happening outside the station. On the local news, Serena Kingscourt was giving an interview. Elodie watched it on the TV in her office. "It's truly tragic," Serena said, dabbing a fake tear from her eye. "We had such high hopes for Chief Kingswell, but her behavior on Friday, attacking a decorated officer like Lieutenant Rockford, it suggests deep psychological instability. We are looking into her past. We believe she may have lied on her vetting forms." The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "New Chief. Unhinged aggressor?" Elodie turned off the TV. They were controlling the narrative. They were painting Rockford as the victim of a tyrannical, angry boss. Her door opened. It was Soren. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. He checked the hallway before closing the door and locking it. "Chief? Aunt Elodie?" Soren whispered. "They're planning something big. I heard Rockford talking to Miller." Elodie motioned for him to sit. "You need to be careful, Soren. Being seen with me is dangerous right now." "I don't care," Soren said, though his shaking hands betrayed him. "I became a cop to do good. What I saw on Friday? That was evil. I can't let them get away with it." "What did you hear?" "Rockford is planting evidence," Soren said fast. "They know you're going to audit the evidence locker. They're moving the stolen drugs and cash out, and they're going to plant a bag of fentanyl in your desk. Tonight." Elodie leaned back in her chair. It was a classic setup. Discredit the reformer by making them look like a hypocrite. "If they find drugs in my desk, the Kingscourts will have the state police here in an hour to arrest me," Elodie mused. "We have to stop them," Soren said. "I can stand guard, I can—" "No," Elodie cut him off. Her eyes gleamed. "Let them plant it." Soren blinked. "What? If we stop them, they'll just try something else later that I might not see coming," Elodie explained. "I need to catch them in the act. I need indisputable proof. Soren, did you know that the security cameras in the building run on a closed loop?" "Yeah. Miller controls them. He deletes anything Rockford tells him to." "Miller controls the old system," Elodie smiled. "Before I arrived, I had the state IT department install a shadow server. It mirrors everything. Miller thinks he's deleting footage, but he's actually just archiving it to a cloud server only I can access." Soren's eyes went wide. "So you have the footage of the slap?" "No," Elodie frowned. "The body cams are a separate system. Rockford destroyed the physical SD card. That's gone. But I have eyes inside this building, and tonight we're going to let Rockford dig his own grave." Night fell over Oak Creek. The precinct was running on a skeleton crew. Elodie had made a show of leaving at 6 p.m., loudly complaining about a headache. She drove her rental car home, parked it, and then immediately slipped out the back door into Mileson's waiting black SUV. They drove back to the precinct, parking 2 blocks away in an alley. "You sure about this?" Mileson asked, checking the feed on his laptop. He was tapped into the shadow server Elodie had mentioned. "Look," Elodie pointed at the screen. On the grainy black and white feed of the chief's office, the door creaked open. A figure entered using a flashlight. It was Rockford. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing a black hoodie. He moved to Elodie's desk. He pulled a heavy plastic bag of white powder from his pocket, enough fentanyl to kill half the city, and taped it to the underside of her bottom drawer. "Gotcha," Mileson whispered, hitting the record button. "Wait," Elodie said. "Look who else is there." "Look who—" Another figure entered. It was Tessa Kingscourt. "Is it done?" Tessa's voice came through the audio pickup. "Done," Rockford grunted. "Tomorrow morning you call the state police for a surprise inspection. They bring the dogs. The dogs hit on the desk. Boom. Chief goes to prison for trafficking." "Good," Tessa sneered. I want her destroyed, Corbin. I want her name to be mud. No one defies the king's courts. What about the rookie? Soren? Rockford asked. He's weak, Tessa dismissed. Once Elodie is gone, we'll fire him, or maybe we'll frame him too. A family of criminals. Elodie watched the screen, her heart pounding. This was it. Conspiracy to frame a police chief. Racketeering. Corruption. We have enough to arrest them now, Mileson said, reaching for his phone to call the FBI. Not yet, Elodie stopped him. If we arrest them for this, their lawyers will claim the video is doctored. They'll claim I planted the camera illegally. We need the body cam footage of the slap. That's the emotional hook. That's what turns the public against them. The drug's frame-up is legal, but the slap, that's personal. But you said the card was destroyed, Mileson noted. The card in the camera was destroyed, Elodie corrected. But Soren told me something interesting. Rockford wears a secondary backup camera, a personal one he bought to record his busts for his ego. He keeps the footage on a hard drive in his locker. He calls it his trophy case. You want to break into his locker? Mileson looked at his wife like she was crazy. Not me, Elodie said. Soren. At that moment, on the screen, the door to the locker room opened. Soren crept in. He was on the phone, an earbud in his ear. I'm in, Aunt Elodie. Soren's voice crackled over the radio in the SUV. Okay, Soren, Elodie said into her comms. Rockford is in my office with Tessa. You have maybe 5 minutes before they leave. His locker is number 402. The combination is his birthday. Try 04-12-80. Soren moved to the locker. He spun the dial. It clicked open. I see it, Soren whispered. External hard drive. It's here. Grab it and get out now, Elodie commanded. Suddenly, the door to the locker room swung open. Rockford and Tessa were leaving. They walked right past the row of lockers where Soren was hiding. Soren held his breath, clutching the hard drive to his chest. Through the slats of the locker, he saw Rockford stop. Did you hear that? Rockford asked. Hear what? Tessa snapped. Let's go. This place smells like sweat. I heard breathing, Rockford said. He drew his gun. Elodie and Mileson watched in horror on the monitor. Rockford was walking slowly down the row of lockers, checking the vents. He was 10 feet from Soren. 5 feet. Soren, Elodie whispered urgently, do not move. Rockford stopped right in front of Soren's hiding spot. He reached out and grabbed the handle of the locker next to Soren's. He yanked it open. Empty. Rockford scoffed. Must be rats. He holstered his gun and walked out with Tessa. Soren collapsed against the metal wall of the locker, gasping for air. I got it, Soren whimpered. I got the trophy case. The next morning, the trap was sprung, but not the one Rockford expected. At 9 a.m., the state police arrived with K-9 units, just as Tessa had planned. The media was there too, tipped off by Serena. They were ready to film the corrupt chief being walked out in cuffs. Captain Harris of the state police marched into Elodie's office. Rockford stood by the door, trying to hide a smirk. Tessa and Serena were in the lobby acting concerned. Chief Kingswell, Captain Harris said sternly, we received an anonymous tip regarding narcotics distribution within this office. We need to search the premises. Elodie didn't look up from her paperwork. Good morning, Captain. By all means, search away. Rockford frowned. She was too calm. The dog handler brought in a German shepherd. The dog sniffed around the room. It sniffed the bookshelf. It sniffed the trash can. It sniffed Elodie's desk. Rockford held his breath, waiting for the bark. The dog sniffed the bottom drawer and moved on. It wandered over to the window and lay down, bored. No hit, the handler said. Rockford's eyes bugged out. Check again. Check the bottom drawer, he shouted, forgetting himself. Captain Harris turned to Rockford. Excuse me, Lieutenant? How do you know which drawer to check? Rockford stammered. Usually that's where people hide things. Harris signaled the handler to check the drawer manually. He pulled it open. It was empty. No drugs. Just a single piece of paper. Harris picked up the paper. "It's a note." "What does it say?" Elodie asked, finally looking up with a razor-sharp smile. Harris read it aloud. "Nice try, Corbin. The janitor—" Rockford turned pale. Elodie stood up. "You see, Captain, I came in very early this morning. I found a suspicious package in my drawer. I didn't touch it. I called the FBI. They came and collected it for fingerprint analysis at 5 a.m. They found Lieutenant Rockford's prints all over the bag, and Tessa Kingscourt's DNA on the tape." The color drained from Tessa's face in the lobby as she watched through the glass. "Captain Harris," Elodie said, her voice booming, "I am filing charges against Lieutenant Rockford for planting evidence, conspiracy, and possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute." "You can't prove I put it there!" Rockford screamed. "It's my word against yours!" Elodie picked up a remote control and pointed it at the wall-mounted TV. "Actually," Elodie said, "I think we'll watch a movie instead." The screen flickered to life. It showed the high-definition footage from the hidden camera, Rockford taping the drugs, Tessa giving the order. "Arrest him," Captain Harris ordered his men. "No." Rockford pulled his gun. The state troopers drew theirs. "Drop it, Rockford." Rockford backed into the corner, gun shaking. He looked at Tessa, who was already backing away toward the exit, abandoning him. "She told me to do it!" Rockford screamed, pointing at Tessa through the glass. "It was her idea!" "Don't listen to him!" Tessa shrieked. "He's a rogue cop!" "I have more," Elodie said, pressing a button on her laptop. "Soren, play the files." Soren stepped out from the back office, holding the hard drive. He plugged it into the main console. The screen changed. It wasn't the drug plant anymore. It was the dashcam footage from Friday. The slap. The room watched in silence as Rockford brutalized Elodie. They heard the crack of the slap. They heard the slurs. Then, the video changed. It was Rockford beating a teenager 2 months ago, then stealing money from a drug bust last year, then planting a gun on an unarmed man. It was years of crimes, the trophy case. Rockford realized it was over. His hand went limp. The gun clattered to the floor. State troopers tackled him instantly, slamming him face first into the carpet, the same way he had slammed so many innocent people. Elodie walked over to him as he was being cuffed. "I told you," Elodie whispered. "I'm the chief." "You haven't won," Rockford spat, blood from his nose matting the carpet. "The King's Courts own the judges. I'll be out on bail by lunch." Elodie looked out the window where FBI agents were currently surrounding Tessa and Serena Kingscourt in the parking lot. Mileson was there, handing the agents a stack of indictments, thick as a phone book. "Rockford," Elodie said softly, "the King's Courts aren't going to bail you out. They're going to be your cellmates." The arrest of Lieutenant Corbin Rockford didn't end the war. It merely signaled the beginning of the siege. For the next 48 hours, the Oak Creek precinct was a zone of controlled chaos. The state police had established a perimeter, their blue and gold cruisers acting as a barricade against the swarm of news vans that had descended upon the city. Inside, the air was thick with the hum of hard drives being imaged and the sharp ripping sound of evidence tape. Elodie Kingswell hadn't slept. She sat in her office, which had been stripped to the studs by a sweep team to ensure no listening devices remained. Her desk was covered in paper cups of cold coffee and stacks of seized files. Across from her, Mileson looked equally ragged, his tie undone, his eyes scanning financial ledgers on a tablet. Soren, now wearing a temporary badge authorized by the state captain, paced the room like a caged tiger. "They're going to walk, aren't they?" Soren asked, his voice tight with anxiety. He stopped at the window, looking down at the protesters gathering outside. "I know how the King's Courts operate. They have a lawyer, Marcus Vane, who costs more per hour than I make in a year. Vane is already spinning the narrative. He's calling Rockford a rogue actor with a history of mental instability. He's claiming Tessa and Serena are victims of extortion. Elodie rubbed her temples, feeling the throb of a migraine. It's the standard playbook. Cut off the infected limb to save the body. They'll throw Rockford into the fire to keep their empire from burning. And it's working, Mileson muttered, tossing the tablet onto the desk. I've been tracking their offshore accounts. They moved $12 million to the Caymans this morning. They're liquidating. If they aren't arrested in the next 24 hours, they'll be on a private jet to a non-extradition country, and all we'll have is a disgraced lieutenant who will likely get shanked in prison before he can testify. We need leverage, Elodie said, staring at the wall where she had pinned up photos of the key players. Rockford was a bully, but he wasn't stupid. He knew who he was working for. He knew that one day the twins would turn on him. The trophy case, Soren said. We went through the hard drive. It was mostly just videos of his assaults. Soren flinched at the memory of watching the footage. There was nothing linking the sisters directly to the crimes. Look again, Elodie commanded. Rockford is a narcissist, but he's also paranoid. He wouldn't just keep trophies of his wins, he'd keep insurance for his losses. Soren sat down at the secure terminal. He pulled up the directory of the seized drive. I've checked every folder. Busts, gym, personal. What's in personal? Elodie asked. Just pictures of his truck and his dog, Soren sighed. Open the dog photos, Elodie said. Soren clicked. A series of JPEGs of a Rottweiler appeared. Check the file sizes, Elodie instructed, her federal training kicking in. Soren frowned. That's weird. This picture of the dog is 4.5 gigabytes. That's massive for a JPEG. Steganography, Mileson realized, leaning forward. He hid data inside the image file. Soren's fingers flew across the keyboard, running a decryption script Elodie provided. The image of the dog dissolved, replaced by a password prompt. Try the birthday again, Soren suggested. A04-1280. Access denied. Try untouchable, Elodie said softly. Soren typed it in. Access granted. A new folder opened, simply titled The Burn. There was only one video file inside. Soren hit play. The video was shaky, filmed from a dashboard camera pointed inside a vehicle. It was night. Rain battered the windshield. Rockford was in the driver's seat. In the rearview mirror, illuminated by the passing streetlights, were Tessa and Serena Kingscourt. They looked younger, perhaps a year ago. They were drinking champagne from plastic flutes. The Whispering Pines problem is becoming tedious, Corbin. Tessa's voice purred through the speakers, clear and chilling. The eviction notices are being ignored. The rats refuse to leave the nest. The city council won't approve eminent domain, Rockford grunted. Too many families. The optics are bad. Screw the optics, Serena snapped, lighting a cigarette. The flame illuminated her face, twisting it into a demonic mask. We have the mall deal signed. If we don't clear that land by next month, we lose the contract. We lose millions. There was a silence in the car. Then Tessa leaned forward, whispering near Rockford's ear. Wood burns, Corbin, and old buildings have such terrible wiring, accidents happen during storms like this. You want me to torch it? Rockford asked, his voice devoid of surprise. We want you to solve the problem, Serena corrected. Make sure the alarms don't work. Make sure the hydrants are dry. And make sure the investigation file gets lost in the basement. It'll cost you, Rockford said. Double your salary for life, Tessa promised. The video ended. The silence in Elodie's office was heavier than the humid air outside. It was a suffocating, horrified silence. Whispering Pines, Soren whispered, his face draining of color. That fire happened last October. It was a 4-alarm blaze. 3 people died. An old woman and 2 kids. They murdered them, Elodie said, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a rage so cold it burned. They didn't just embezzle or assault. They burned children alive for a shopping mall. This is it, Mileson said, his hands shaking as he backed up the file. This is 3 counts of felony murder, racketeering, conspiracy, arson. This puts them away for life. No bail, no Cayman Islands. We have to arrest them now, Soren said, standing up. I'll get the team. No, Elodie stopped him. She looked at the time. If we go to their estate, their private security will stall us. They might have a panic room. They might destroy devices. We need them in the open. We need them where they can't hide behind walls or lawyers. Where? Mileson asked. Tonight is the town hall meeting, Elodie said, her eyes narrowing. They pushed it up to tonight to rally public support. They're going to be on stage, live streamed to the whole city, claiming they are the victims of a witch hunt. Elodie stood up and walked to the closet. She pulled out her dress uniform, the pristine navy blue jacket with the gold epaulets she hadn't worn yet. They want an audience? Elodie said, buttoning the jacket. Let's give them a show they'll never forget. The Oak Creek Community Center was a cauldron of noise and heat. The air conditioning had failed an hour ago, but the crowd hadn't dispersed. If anything, the stifling atmosphere only fueled the tension. Over 500 people were packed into the auditorium. The room was divided. On the left sat the King's Court loyalists, city contractors, wealthy business owners, and families who owed their livelihoods to the sisters' patronage. They held signs reading, "Support our police and stop the witch hunt." On the right sat the rest of Oak Creek, the families from the crumbling tenements, the victims of Rockford's brutality, the mothers who had lost sons to the justice system. They sat in simmering silence, waiting. On the stage, Tessa and Serena Kingscourt sat on plush velvet chairs, looking like royalty in exile. They were dressed in white, a calculated choice to suggest innocence and purity. Their lawyer, Marcus Vane, stood at the podium, wiping sweat from his brow. "Citizens of Oak Creek," Vane bellowed into the microphone, "we are witnessing a tragedy, a federal overreach designed to destroy the very pillars of this community. Chief Kingswell is an outsider with a radical agenda." Tessa stood up, taking the mic. She looked frail, her eyes wide and wet. It was a masterclass in manipulation. "We trusted Lieutenant Rockford," Tessa said, her voice breaking perfectly. "We treated him like family. To find out he was unstable. It breaks our hearts. But to be accused of directing his madness, it is insulting. My sister and I have dedicated our lives to this city. We built the parks," Serena added, standing up to join her twin. "We funded the library. And now, because of one bad apple, they want to tear down our legacy." The loyalists cheered. "We love you, Tessa. We love you, Serena." "They're going to get away with it," a woman in the back row muttered, clutching a photo of her son. "They always do." At that moment, the double doors at the back of the hall didn't just open, they were thrown wide with a resounding bang. The cheering died instantly. Every head turned. Elodie Kingswell stood in the doorway. She was flanked by Captain Harris of the State Police, 6 uniformed state troopers, and a dozen FBI agents in windbreakers marked Federal Agent. But it was Elodie who commanded the room. In her full-dress uniform, her gold badge gleaming under the house lights, she looked like the embodiment of judgment. She didn't speak. She began to walk down the center aisle. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of her polished boots on the hardwood floor. Tessa Kingscourt gripped the podium, her knuckles turning white. "Chief Kingswell," she hissed into the mic, her frailty vanishing. "You have no business here. This is a private town hall." Elodie didn't stop until she reached the base of the stairs. She looked up at the sisters, her expression unreadable. Then she climbed the steps, the heavy thud of her boots echoing through the speaker system. She walked past Vane, ignoring his protests, and stood at the second microphone. "I am not here to debate," Elodie's voice boomed, calm and resonant. "I am here to correct the record." "Cut her mic!" Serena screamed at the sound technician in the booth above. "Cut it now!" The technician was a 20-year-old kid named Leo. He had grown up in Whispering Pines. He had lost his cat in the fire. He looked down at Serena, his hand hovering over the mute button. Then, he looked at Elodie. Leo took his hand off the mute button. He pushed the volume fader to the max. "Lieutenant Rockford has confessed," Elodie announced. The feedback whine pierced the room, making people wince, but no one looked away. "He gave us the files on the police corruption, but he gave us something else too." "He's a liar," Tessa shrieked, losing her composure. "Don't listen to her. She's deranged." "He gave us the truth about Whispering Pines," Elodie said. The name sucked the air out of the room. The murmurs began. "Whispering Pines? The fire?" "That was an accident!" Vane shouted, trying to block Elodie. Captain Harris stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on the lawyer's chest and moving him aside like a piece of furniture. "Leo," Elodie said, looking up at the booth. "Play the file." The giant projector screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the King's Court family crest, flickered. Static filled the screen. Then, the video of the rainy night appeared. The audio was deafening in the silent hall. "Wood burns, Corbin. Old buildings have such terrible wiring." The crowd watched in paralyzed horror as the sisters on screen, the same women standing in white on stage, ordered the burning of a building full of people. "Make sure the hydrants are dry." The video ended. The screen went black. For 3 seconds, there was no sound, no breathing, no movement. Then a wail broke the silence. It was a primal, gut-wrenching scream from the right side of the aisle. A mother fell to her knees, sobbing. "My baby! You burned my baby!" The shockwave hit. The loyalists on the left side of the room dropped their signs. They looked at the sisters with dawning horror. The veneer of benevolence had been ripped away, revealing the monsters underneath. "Murderers!" a man shouted. "Burn them!" another voice screamed. The crowd surged forward. The anger was instantaneous and violent. "Hold them back!" Elodie ordered the troopers. She didn't want a riot. She wanted justice. The FBI agents swarmed the stage. Tessa and Serena backed away, their heels clicking frantically on the stage floor. They bumped into each other, clutching hands, but their eyes were wild with panic. "It's a deep fake!" Tessa screamed, her face contorted, ugly with fear. "It's AI! She made it up!" "Tessa Kingscourt, Serena Kingscourt!" the lead FBI agent shouted over the roar of the crowd. "You are under arrest for racketeering, arson, and 3 counts of felony murder." The agents grabbed them. The struggle was undignified. Serena clawed at an agent's face, screaming obscenities. Tessa tried to run for the back curtain, but Soren was there. He stood in her path, his arms crossed, his face grim. "It's over, Aunt Tessa," Soren said quietly. Tessa looked at him, then spat in his face. "You traitor! You ungrateful little rat!" Soren didn't flinch. He wiped the spittle away as the agents handcuffed her, dragging her arms behind her back until she yelped. As they were marched off the stage, the crowd didn't just boo. They turned their backs. Hundreds of people turning their backs on the King's Courts, denying them the attention they craved. Elodie stood alone at the podium, watching the red and blue lights flashing against the back wall of the auditorium. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt clean in days. The fallout was swift, brutal, and absolute. The arrest at the town hall broke the dam. With the King's Courts in federal custody, their network of protection evaporated. City employees who had been silent for years came forward with documents, recordings, and testimony. The King's Court empire wasn't just dismantled, it was atomized. The federal government seized everything. The mansion on the hill, the offshore accounts, the fleet of luxury cars. The sisters were denied bail, deemed extreme flight risks. They were moved to separate federal detention centers to prevent them from coordinating their defense. But the hardest, coldest karma was reserved for the man who started it all. 3 days after the arrests, Elodie visited the county jail. She walked down the long, concrete corridor to Interrogation Room 1. Inside, Corbin Rockford sat handcuffed to the table. He was unrecognizable. The swagger was gone. The muscle seemed to have deflated, leaving behind loose skin and shaking hands. He hadn't shaved, and his eyes were bloodshot and frantic. He looked up when Elodie entered. Hope, desperate and pathetic, flared in his eyes. "Chief," Rockford croaked. "Chief, thank God. When am I moving? My lawyer said the federal deal is signed. Witness protection, right? Or at least a federal low-security facility?" Elodie placed a single file on the metal table. She didn't sit down. "You did sign a federal deal, Corbin," Elodie said, her voice devoid of pity. "You gave up the King's Courts for the RICO case. For that, the feds took the death penalty off the table for the arson charges." "Okay, good, good," Rockford breathed, sweating. "So where am I going? Florida? North Dakota?" "There's a complication," Elodie said. "What complication?" Rockford froze. "The plea deal covered your federal crimes," Elodie explained slowly. "Racketeering, conspiracy, arson, but it didn't cover your state crimes." Rockford blinked. "State crimes? But double jeopardy doesn't apply to separate sovereigns." Elodie cut him off. "You assaulted me. You assaulted that teenager in the park last year. You broke the jaw of a shoplifter 3 months ago. Those are state-level assault and battery charges." "But the judge, Judge Miller, he's on our side," Rockford stammered. "Judge Miller resigned yesterday," Elodie smiled, a cold, sharp expression. "He's currently cooperating with the FBI to save his own pension. The new judge is Judge Holloway." Rockford's face went gray. Holloway was a hardliner. Rockford had mocked her in open court once. "Holloway rejected the concurrent sentencing," Elodie said. "She ordered you to serve your state time before your federal time." "State time?" Rockford whispered. "You mean the state penitentiary," Elodie confirmed. "General population." "No," Rockford whimpered, tears leaking from his eyes. "No, you can't! Chief, please! I put half the guys in that prison away. The Latin Kings, the Aryan Brotherhood. They have a green light on me. I won't last a week." "You should have thought about that before you abused the badge," Elodie said. "I'm sorry," Rockford screamed, falling out of his chair, dangling by his handcuffed wrist. "I'm sorry I slapped you. I'm sorry I called you names. I'll do anything. I'll beg. Please, Elodie." Elodie watched him grovel on the dirty linoleum. She remembered the snap of his hand against her face. She remembered the fear in the eyes of the people he tormented. "You're not sorry you did it, Rockford," Elodie said softly. "You're just sorry the rabbit finally got the gun." She turned and walked to the door. "Elodie, don't leave me here! They'll kill me!" Rockford shrieked, his voice cracking into a sob. Elodie closed the heavy steel door, cutting off his screams. Outside the jail, the sun was setting. The heat wave had finally broken, and a cool breeze blew through the streets of Oak Creek. Soren was waiting by her car. He looked different, older but lighter. He wore his new sergeant's stripes. "Is it done?" Soren asked. "It's done," Elodie nodded. "Mileson is waiting at the diner." Soren smiled. "Says he's buying the biggest stack of pancakes in the city to celebrate." Elodie looked back at the precinct. It was still a scarred building. There was still work to do. Trust had to be rebuilt, brick by brick. But the shadow was gone. The rot had been cut out. "Let's go," Elodie said, opening the car door. "I'm starving." As they drove away, the radio played a song about a new day coming. For the first time in 20 years, the people of Oak Creek weren't looking over their shoulders. They were looking forward. The justice served in Oak Creek was absolute. Tessa and Serena Kingscourt were sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without parole. The women who once treated the city as their playground now spend 23 hours a day in a 6x8 concrete cell, their beauty fading under the harsh fluorescent lights of federal prison. As for Corbin Rockford, his fate was sealed the moment the prison bus gates closed behind him. Stripped of his badge, his power, and his protection, he lives every second in terror, a permanent prisoner of the very system he corrupted. Elodie Kingswell proved that a badge isn't a shield for cruelty. It's a weight of responsibility. And when you strike a king's swell, you better not miss. Wow, talk about instant karma. Rockford really thought he was the king of the world until he met the real boss. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It helps the channel so much. What was your favorite part? Was it the slap, the hidden camera reveal, or seeing the sisters dragged off stage? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories where the bullies get exactly what's coming to them, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching and stay safe out there.